Hey everyone, and welcome into FCC Talk. I am here with our senior minister, Gregg, getting ready to talk to him about different news stories, things going on, ministry updates, obviously no politics, uplifting, good conversation that you will just like to listen to and deliver you a little bit of news of what's going on in the Christian world. Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, John. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. I know people have told me they appreciate you coming on out of your busy days, so it's nice of you to make time for us.
Well, thank you. It is kind of a challenge, but we get her done.
There you go. Stick a mic in front of your face for half hour, 45 minutes,
and try to talk.
And we'll try to talk. So let's waste no time, and we'll just get right on into it. Today we have a few different things we're going to talk about. We kind of got a range today, okay? So our first thing on the docket is some biblical archaeology. There's some archaeological finds that happened in the Holy Lands where Chris was recently. So we'll ask Chris about some of biblical archaeology and also just about his trip to the Holy Lands. We'll also get into some of responding to anti-Christian bias in the workplace. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do there. And then finally, we are going to hit a documentary that was released, I don't know how long ago it was, Chris, a year or two ago?
Probably.
Maybe, about the Duggar family, and there have been some new updates on that. We're going to talk about that, but we'll probably end up just mostly talking about that documentary because Chris and I have both watched it. It's been a topic of conversation in our staff meetings and stuff a few times. So if you haven't seen it, you'll learn a little bit about it from us. But let's just go ahead and get into it first thing, Chris. So there have been new discoveries that may change what we know about Jerusalem's Basilica and the new Sepulcher. I know I'm pronouncing those probably wrong, but Chris was helping me out earlier. But anyway, so basically in the Holy Lands, there are some new archaeological finds, and I'm not going to go into each and every little one and talk about all those things, but I do want to talk to Chris about biblical archaeology and historical discoveries. And just, Chris, how large of a role does biblical archaeology and those discoveries play in your faith and in your belief that, you know, obviously the Bible is real, that Christ is real, all those things? Can you talk to that a bit?
I think it's super fascinating that my impression going into Israel this last spring, one of the ideas that I had was that there's been archaeology going on all along in the life of the new nation of Israel since 1948, and not quite so much as what I expected. In fact, they make new archaeological finds all the time in Israel, and the reason being that here we are almost 100 years after they became a nation, but when you think about it, there was a lot to do when they became a nation in 1948. The idea of a government, housing, planting trees, just the superstructure or the infrastructure of government and society there in Israel had to occur. And so we were there in March, and in fact, there was a new dig going on. And I'm thinking, why is there a new dig? Everything should have been dug up already, at least in Jerusalem. And that's not the case. All over Israel, there are discoveries all the time, and like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Qumran community and some of those things, they're constantly finding things as they're excavating foundations, as they're doing new digs and new buildings, and we're talking about civilization structures upon civilizations on structures, mound on mound, and so you're looking at 40, 50, even 60 feet of dirt and earth over existing or pre-existing civilizations that they're still discovering. So that's fascinating, and for my faith, it's encouraging that they're finding a lot of things that support the Bible, which, you know, when people question the Bible, there are things that haven't been discovered that confirm things that they're questioning, and so the Bible is a real source for archaeology, but also archaeological digs have always supported the Bible. It's just fascinating.
Right, yeah. And when did you go to the Holy Lands again, Chris?
In March of 2023. And
So
it was a
okay.
great experience, much better than what I even ever expected. I would go back again if there were interested people to go again.
Right. I asked because it said on here that some of the work that they're talking about in this article, which I'll link this article in the description if you would like to read it. But some of the work that they found in this dig was in March of 2022. So apparently they found some of the stuff before you got there. But it sounds like they were starting another dig at that time.
Absolutely, all over. It's just fascinating. In fact, a lot of things are protected. Digs are protected, and once they find something, then all building stops, and they dig slowly and find and discover more things, especially in Jerusalem and especially on the Temple Mount.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that they were talking about that they found was actually a relic of the cross of Christ's crucifixion on the site. Now, I don't know how they know that it's, the cross of Christ. It could just be a standard cross. I have no idea, but I'm sure since they're writing this, there's obviously some kind of evidence that I've maybe just read over or they're not going into detail about. However, that kind of stuff to me is always very interesting to show that, yes, what the Bible talks about took place here. And that's really what we find in biblical archaeology more often than not. I took an archaeology class when I was at KCU, and some of it was super boring. I'll be honest, okay? But some of it was really interesting as well. And this is one thing that I actually found a little bit interesting, that when they find items in that are referenced in the Bible, or they find something that's referenced in the Bible that goes and dates back to a certain time period to show, it's actually accurate. The Bible is dating it this way, and it's actually accurate.
Absolutely.
So now we're not just looking at proof that this did actually happen, but proof that the Bible is speaking about it happening at the right time too, which is huge, and it makes a big difference for those people who want to try and, discredit the Bible or say the Bible is not true, because there are so many of these finds that, I mean, wouldn't you say it makes it almost impossible to disprove the Bible, Chris?
Right. Well, we've got to remember that the Bible, Christianity and Judaism, they are historical faiths that actually occurred in time and in space. Therefore, the archaeology is going to support biblical truth and history. And so if you're a student of the Bible, you really are a history nut because it all took place in history, in a timeline, at certain times, at certain locations that actually existed. It's not myth, in other words.
Right. Yeah, it's all very interesting. Obviously we read the Bible in such a way that we get teaching out of it, and we get, moral advice, and we learn the character of God, and all of those things are awesome. But even like you said, even if you're just reading the Bible, for your own faith, you are reading history. You're reading what has happened. And so maybe for some of us that comes easier than others. For myself, I've always enjoyed history, so I don't have a problem with it. But I know some people that they don't really like history. They weren't history buffs back in the day. So quick question before we move on from this, Chris. Just in your opinion, should every Christian at some point in their life visit the Holy Lands?
If you have the opportunity and that's a desire of your heart. It really wasn't a desire of my heart to go to Israel. In fact, one of our church people asked me if I'd ever thought about it, and I said, actually, no. And so then we organized a group in 2019, and then we canceled in 2020, and we finally went with a few people in 2023. So yes, if you have the opportunity, you have the desire, it's a great experience, and I would encourage people to do that. But you don't have to do that.
Right.
It's a pilgrimage, but it's not, you don't get extra credit. We're saved by grace through faith.
Right.
It's just something good to do.
Yeah. And would you say it strengthened your faith?
I don't know that it strengthened. It was just inspirational in the sense of going places and seeing things that you've read about all your life and studied about. And it was fascinating, like the King's Highway and Tel Megiddo, where Armageddon is supposed to take place, was just beautiful. And you could see forever the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, just some of those places, Caesarea Philippi Maritime, the Decapolis, the cities of Decapolis, and the Roman structures, and the archaeology just made the Bible more real from that sense. And what's amazing is, Chris, we have pictures in our minds of the way we imagine it,
Right.
and I was a little concerned that it wouldn't be like the way we imagine it, or it would be so modern that it would lose impact. And Jerusalem, like the way of the cross, kind of was like that with the merchants and everything around. But in reality, those places like what I was mentioning, Simon Peter's house, Bethsaida, those type of things. I was preaching on the Sermon on the Mount just before we went to Israel, and so I was actually at the location where they think the Sermon on the Mount was, and so that was fascinating for me, and just made it more real. So great experience.
That's
Great
what
experience.
I have always thought about going, is like, I feel like it would just make everything more real to walk the land that Jesus walked,
Right.
and to be in the town
Right.
that Jesus, was in. And it sounds amazing.
From Galilee to Nazareth, where Jesus was, there was only one way to go, and it wasn't a scheduled stop, but we got to go the way of the doves and see. And so we were standing where Jesus obviously had to walk.
Wow.
And so we knew that for a fact. That's one of the few places where we really, really knew kind of that this is the only way they had to go. And so some of those type of experiences were cool and unexpected, that I enjoyed it so much that I could understand somebody. One of the guides had been there 9 times, and I'm thinking, why in the world would you go to Israel 9 times? Well, I would go again just so other people could experience it, and I could help serve them as going.
Right.
Do I need to go again? No. But if you wanted to go and it would make you more comfortable in going, if somebody like me would go with you,
Right.
then that would be a great opportunity for me to just minister to people as they experience that,
Yeah.
and answer questions, because people had all kinds of questions. And obviously, if you study the Bible, you know why these places and locations were important. But a lot of people didn't recognize where they were standing and why it was so important. It was significant. Those were significant places in Jesus'
I'm sure
life.
there were times where you were staying in a certain spot and you got chills or something.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So, all right, well, let's move on to our next topic. Our next topic is being able to respond to coworkers. This deals mostly with coworkers, but really anybody who thinks Christianity is bigoted. Okay, so the Gospel Coalition, I love the Gospel Coalition. They put together this article that answers the question: how do I respond when a coworker angrily disparages Christianity as hateful and bigoted? So, Chris, I know you probably don't have too many coworkers who think that Christianity is hateful and bigoted. I don't think
Right.
me or Dan
Right.
or anybody thinks that. However, I do know that you have been obviously involved in the community a number of ways. You serve on the Y board, and you have worked on your houses in your lifetime as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just the tons of different ways. Have you ever experienced any kind of rejection of your faith like this? If you have, how did you react? What happened, or do you have any examples?
Well, I think until people know you, then they are suspicious of you, and also they talk a lot of Christianese around me, especially once they find out that I'm a pastor or a preacher.
Right.
And so most of the time, I don't let people know what I do until I have to let them know what I do. But I try to love them and to serve them the best way I can, to be kind, but also candid and assertive in the sense of leading or in conversation. I don't hide opinions. I don't go political very often. In fact, I avoid that aspect of Christianity or of politics in blending Christianity with that. But I try to lead with love and kindness, but also just being myself and being relaxed with them. And so if somebody would... The most I've ever experienced is that, in a school, as I was doing youth ministry and campus life on a school campus, talking about separation of church and state, and that law or that part of the Constitution was basically to protect the church and its freedoms from the state, not the state from the church. And so us being present, take us or leave us, but we're here to love and serve and represent Christ. And so a lot of times you need to get to the point where they're talking about their past and their baggage. And a lot of times I apologize in the name of the church for how they've been treated or how they perceived us as Christians. And there's all kinds of perceptions, but to be bigoted, no. To live a biblical, in the way of Jesus life, like I was preaching in the Better series,
Right.
That's what we want to do. We're not here to condemn. We're here to love and help and minister and raise up Jesus Christ, because people typically love Jesus. They don't like the church very much. And, if you're a Christian, church is a pretty important place to us. It's
Right.
a family.
Right, for sure. Yeah. And I think, oftentimes the thing you said there about people with their past and their hurt, oftentimes if somebody has been hurt by a church or has been hurt by somebody who did go to church, in obviously varying of ways. There are some people that the hurt is massive, and there's some people that, maybe it wasn't as big, but it was still big to them. They can obviously then say, well, this is how every church is, or this is how every church person is. When in reality, we just have to do our best to show them that, no, this is not how every person is. And maybe that person that treated you poorly that's not even who they are. Mm-hmm. They just had a moment of, treating somebody incorrectly,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe being frustrated, or maybe being tired. I can't imagine you're ever tired on a Sunday morning and maybe regret the way you've reacted to something before, right, Chris?
Right.
I mean, I've done it before, and so it is kind of a difficult thing to do. The article goes through 5 different points here, and I'll just read them off for you really fast. I'll link this in the description for you, but it says, listen with humility, which I think is a great point. Denounce unchristian likeness. This is a really good point I want to go into in just a second. Affirm Christ. Number 4, seek common ground. And then number 5, be a counterpoint, right? And that's all about living out that counterpoint in them. About a few months ago, I did a Truth Tuesday all about explaining how I can still have faith even with the failures of Christianity. And I just basically said, when somebody brings up the failures of Christianity, whether that be an encounter they had at a church, whether that be somebody who talks about, the Crusades back in the day, or whatever it might be that they want to bring up, I just, I basically just tell them that's not what Jesus taught. That yes, that person may have had a Christian label, but they were not acting the way a Christian should act. And I don't try to tell the other person, I'm sure you've, acted a way that you're not proud. I don't try to attack that person. I just try to say, at the end of the day, they did not act the way that Jesus had them to act. And so even though, yes, those were actions of a Christian, that doesn't define every single Christian out there. Just like I don't think one decision by somebody in a people group should define any people group. Do you have any thoughts on that, Chris?
I just think there needs to be some honesty and authenticity, and typically when people bring those things up, I will agree with them, because I don't like those aspects of Christianity or that aspect of the way that Christian is acting or responding. But that's not all Christians, and that is not the way Jesus lived or the way Jesus loved, and that's who we're to be about, because otherwise we're never going to be Christ to everyone perfectly, because we are sinful, fallible human beings. And people have to understand that. But at the same time, we're to be loving, humble, caring servants who have a common purpose to live the best life that we can for Christ and to help others.
Right. And sometimes it might feel like when you are trying to be that servant, when you are trying to be that person who is loving, it might feel like you're not getting anywhere, right? It
Right.
might feel like, well, is any of this actually doing
Right.
anything? This person continues to, badmouth my faith or badmouth,
Hmm.
whatever. Well, I mean, I think the Bible is pretty clear that when you have enemies, especially enemies of the faith, you pray
Hmm.
for them, right?
Hmm.
I mean, that is one of the most important things we can do when we encounter somebody who does have a negative view about our faith, especially who is pouring it onto us, is that we are willing to pray for that person. And if that person ever does encounter, Mark was talking about this the other day in staff meeting, if that person ever does encounter a hardship of life, right? The loss of a loved one, financial struggle, anything that really can bring them down, we try our very best to be there for them through
Hmm.
that, regardless of how they've treated us in the past, because we're not called to get even. We're called to get people to heaven.
Right. And a lot of times I just want to get curious. I want to listen.
Yeah.
And I want to hear where they're at and why they are approaching Christianity or myself in that manner. What, have you had a bad day? What's going on? What has caused you to feel this way? And help me understand.
Right. Right. All right, our last topic of conversation. I guess not our very last one because we'll have some other stuff here in a minute. But I guess our last news story here. Jill Duggar Dillard. Okay, so if you don't know, the Duggar family, obviously they've had some drama lately. Was it the oldest son, Chris, who he got in trouble for some child pornography and things like that, and some just really really gross stuff that no person should have on their hands. However, this he did have that, and obviously now more is coming out about the Duggar family. There's a documentary called Shiny Happy People that was released on Amazon. If you've seen it, the lady, the blonde-haired lady who was in the family, her name is Jill. This is about her. And the title of the article is Jill Duggar Dillard says her father treats her worse than her pedophile brother. And so, I think it's almost appropriate that we just got done talking about how people get hurt through church or faith and those things, because if you've watched Shiny Happy People, that's essentially what happened in that entire documentary. Is somebody was not treated correctly, and it's a failure of Christianity the way she was treated. But she was not treated correctly, and so obviously she is hurt. There were things that went on with their show back in I forget what the show was called. Was it like the Duggar Show or something?
Yeah,
like
the
that?
Duggar family.
The Duggar family show, and just a whole lot of drama that we can't get into all of it here. But if you want to watch the documentary, you can do so. It's not pro Christianity, so just be ready for that, right? It's but anyway, just Chris, this whole situation here and everything going on. What is your response to the Duggar family, the Shiny Happy People? Kind of, what was your whole thought process around that documentary and the family, everything going on there?
Well, as I watched it, part of my history and our family history was impacted by some of the same things that the Duggar family was in the 80s. International Basic Life Principles, IBLP, and Bill Gothard had an influence on my life, not to the extreme of the Duggars, but this whole homeschool movement, very conservative, very formulaic Christianity, and the how-tos drew a lot of people that were anxious about parenting, raising family, and cultural influences on their children and how they could avoid it. And so then again, we kind of swing to the far right extreme, and not that it's wrong, but the Duggar family was kind of in that mode. And in that mode, there were some abuses and some overkill in relationship that was really kind of disheartening and disappointing, because there were a lot of positive things that occurred at the same time.
Right.
And so when Shiny Happy People and the Duggar family was on TV, I didn't even watch the reality show because that just didn't appeal to me because it reminded me of some things and the impact in my life, and I saw some extremes and some abuses in that area, even as I was trying to glean out the truth and what was usable for our lives and family that would be positive. And then to see the demise and the discreditation of Christianity because of some of the abuses that occurred in that situation.
Right.
That is kind of what I was watching occur. Of course, when you put your family on TV, and I can't even remember the name of the show that the Duggars was in. Some of you probably remember that, but then you put the spotlight on this extreme roles and extreme lifestyle, which was interesting and fascinating for people that were viewing, but not a real representative of Christ, the way of Christ in Christianity. It was a lot of man's tradition, a lot of formulas, and a lot of things that were more man-made than they were, thus saith the Lord, you have to do it this way.
Right. And Shaylee and I kind of talked about that a little bit last week because we were talking a little bit about homeschooling, private schooling, public schooling a little bit, because we talked about how some colleges are, Christian colleges are increasing their enrollment right now, which is really interesting. However, we talked a lot about how, like, in a lot of these areas, there is not any biblical mandate for us to do a certain thing when it comes to schooling. There's not a certain mandate on what we should do. So we just kind of have to be wise and make the best decisions we can, especially what works for our families. And I think in this situation, the Duggars kind of, I don't want to say they found what worked for their family, because obviously not everything turned out perfect for them, but they, sounds like they were trying to do the best they could. I don't know the Duggars or anything like that, but they basically became these examples for everybody to follow, to say, hey, you need to do everything just like us, A, B, C, and D. And then obviously that came with scrutiny, that came with judgment, not only on the parents, but then that also came to the children as well. And just, when I got done watching the documentary, I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I didn't really know how to feel. I just felt like, this was a story of a family that became broken.
Right. Well, it started out as a reality show, 19 Kids and Counting.
Right.
Is the name of the show that they were on. And then as that played out and the family disintegrated and some of the values weren't lived out, and which just always occurs in every Christian family. We live the values to the best of our ability by the grace of God through the Spirit of God, but we're always going to have failure. Right. But in this, with the spotlight on in this extreme way of life with 19 kids, I can't imagine. And then the breakup of that family and the divorce and everything that occurred with it is kind of a heartbreaking situation. But again, it's a reality show, and how much of it is true and how much is spin, you really don't know.
Right. That's the thing too, is, one of the things that felt like the documentary was trying to get at was, homeschooling bad, don't homeschool your children. And it came back to, like you said, you lived in that era, and obviously your kids weren't homeschooled, right? They were the cornerstone, but you still tried to live out some of these principles of, what was typically taught back then. And even me, I was homeschooled in the early 2000s. I was homeschooled in the 90s. And I'm watching this thing about IBLP and Bill Gothard, and I'm saying to myself, I had never heard anything about this. And that's apparently when all this stuff went on. So, it's difficult because obviously more about wanting to have a stereotype, wanting to say, oh, this is bad. Just kind of like how the Duggars were trying to say, oh, do exactly what we were doing. At the end of the day, a lot of these things, there is no 100 correct, foolproof way. I think that's why the Bible talks so much about wisdom and just making good decisions and having a heart for God.
And what may work for some people as they follow Christ in their family may not be, it's not of thus saith the Lord.
Right.
And God gives us general instructions in regard to family and in marriage and some things like that are thus saith the Lord.
Right.
And then the other working out of it and how you teach your children and how you raise your children and whether you homeschool or go to Christian school or public school is a matter of choice and of your own conviction and the way the Lord is leading you. And so every family at that point is different, and their way of doing things, if it's not contrary to the Word of God, is their choice. And as I've tell our staff and members of our church, every parent has the right to screw up their kid in their own way. And I say that not saying that parents are intending to screw up their kids. It's just that everybody, I think, wants to do their best to take care and raise their children in a godly way as possible. And that doesn't mean that all of us take the same path or go the same way, because ultimately it comes down to the parents and their devotion to Christ and their upbringing their children. And if that's a consistent pattern of living and loving and following Jesus, those kids are going to love Jesus too.
Right. And that's the thing too, is that, it's God who works on the child's heart. It's God who works on every single person's heart. We don't need to take all of that pressure onto ourselves and say, the only way my child is ever going to become a Christian is if I do everything right. Unfortunately, we're not going to do everything right. I found that out pretty quick in parenting.
Did you figure that one out?
I found that out during the pregnancy, that I don't do everything right.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think the thing is, it shouldn't be fear or anxiety driven. It should be love driven and lived out authentically. And that means mistakes and all, to say, hey, I made a mistake, or I overreacted, or I should have done this, and love that child and hold that child accountable and discipline that child in love and correct them because you love them. I think, and have a devotion to Christ and his church and live that example out. I don't think you can lose on that.
Yeah. I agree. If your heart is for Christ, that's what's most important. I mean, that's why I think Scripture is clear that God looks at us for our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
He looks and sees where our heart's at, what do they yearn for. And just last quick point, if you've never done it before, read through the entire book of Proverbs.
Mm-hmm.
There's 31, or is it 30? There are 30 or 31? 31. That's right, because it's probably 31 women. There are 31 chapters in Proverbs. Okay, take one chapter each day of 1 month and just go ahead and read through it, and I promise you will learn so much about wisdom. I try to do that at least once a year, and every single time I am astounded with what I learn, what I take away. And that's the thing about Proverbs and wisdom, is it's not, hey, you should do this in your life. A lot of it is very metaphorical. A lot of it is very open-ended, so you can kind of decide. I mean, there's literally a verse in there that says it's better to eat vegetables with good people than to have steak by yourself. I mean, you can take that a numerous number of ways. But essentially, it's speaking in such a way that it's kind of open-ended and applies to your life. So yeah. Any more thoughts on that before we move on, Chris?
Nope.
All right. Our last two things. The next one is, what are you eating? What are you watching? What are you reading? Anything new in your life, Chris, that you're eating, watching, or reading?
Reading a book called Leveling Up with a group of ministers here in town. And it's by, I can't remember, Kent something. And it's just interesting. It's a leadership book. I'm reading Crucial Conversations again, which is about conflict management when stakes are high and conversations are difficult. How do we address those kind of concerns? Not watching a lot of movies right now. I'm pretty busy in general. And what am I eating?
Yeah, is there anything
I'm overeating. I'm overeating everything.
Are there any new fall foods that you're having with fall coming up?
Oh my!
We had chili the other night.
I like chili. I like broccoli and cheese soup.
Oh,
I like soups. I'm trying to get back into running. I'd like to run a couple days a week. I have an exercise class that I do a couple days a week, and I'd like on the other days to run, I don't know, 2 or 3 miles, get up to 3 to 5 miles every, do like 1, 3, 5 mile, and then go 2, 4, 6 the next week, and then go back and just kind of a few miles.
Yeah.
Just to kind
That's a good goal.
of de-stress and lose some weight and get a little bit healthier.
Yeah.
That's the goal. That's it.
All right. Very good. Yeah. For me, just football. It's fall time, so I'm watching football. Nothing else really going on other than that, and I'm not reading anything right now because I'm just watching so much football that I'm not a huge reader. Normally when I have something I want to learn, I watch a video on YouTube or I listen to a podcast or something like that. I know most ministers are really big readers, but I like to watch Mike Whalen.
I read a lot. And a lot of it's in pertaining to preaching and sermons, but I read a lot daily.
Well, one more thing before we get out of here, Chris. Is there a Bible verse that you have been thinking about recently, or just something that's kind of impacted your heart? I know you've obviously been preaching a lot, so you might be regurgitating something that you've preached, but anything that just been on your heart lately?
Well, it's interesting. Chris, we're deep into the Rooted series right now, and this week I'm preaching about suffering, and just have been fascinating with the concept of joining Christ in suffering and how that is a part of our lives. For all of us, we will have trouble in this life, and in this life you will have trouble, but never fear. I have overcome the world, Jesus says. And so in addressing suffering in the human condition, that's something that I've been thinking about this week.
Yeah. Romans chapter 8, verses 17 through 18 says, "In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs to God's glory. But if we are to share his glory, we must also share his suffering. Yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal to us later." That's always been the connection for me is, as we share in Christ's suffering, we will also share in his glory someday with him. And that's, at the end of the day, that is what we look forward to as Christians, more than anything. This life is a blessing. We have loved ones, we have our families, we have so many things that God has blessed us with, but in reality, none of this will ever compare to what we will have with Christ someday, and when we are united with him in heaven. So, any more thoughts, Chris?
Not at all.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us on FCC Talk. Thanks to Chris for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.